There comes a moment in every relationship when a woman, whether by instinct or intention, chooses to step back. Not to manipulate, not to test, but to honor her own energy. She gives space, not as a punishment, but as a necessary silence. It is in that silence where the truth begins to speak. For what a man feels when you give him space is not always immediate, but it is always revealing. At first, he may feel relief. The noise quiets. The expectations fall away. He stretches out in his solitude like a man finally left alone with his thoughts. But what he does not realize is that solitude does not just give him room. It gives his unconscious permission to rise. And in that space, he is no longer reacting to your presence. He is reacting to his own internal world. This is when the truth of his feelings begins to emerge. Not the truth he speaks aloud, but the one buried deep in the architecture of his psyche. He begins to confront what you truly meant to him. Not just the surface level things, the conversations, the touches, the laughter, but something more haunting. The emotional resonance you left behind. Without you, his world becomes unbalanced in subtle ways. The routines feel emptier. The jokes feel flatter. He may try to replace the silence with distraction. But even that becomes a mirror. Because no matter what he runs to, he cannot escape the image of you that now lives in his unconscious. This is the beginning of what depth psychology calls the confrontation with the shadow. Without you there to carry the emotional labor, without you filling in the gaps, he meets the parts of himself he has long ignored. He sees the insecurities, the fears, the inner boy who still seeks validation. He begins to realize that your presence allowed him to avoid this confrontation, and now your absence forces him into it. But here's the paradox. If he truly cared, if your presence touched something sacred in him, then your distance does not create detachment. It creates longing. Not the shallow longing of lust, but the deeper ache of emotional absence. He will begin to feel a pull, a discomfort, a questioning of why his peace has been disturbed. That discomfort is not always painful. It is enlightening. It is the soul beginning to realize the value of what was taken for granted. In your space he learns. If he is mature, he will reflect. He will begin to understand the depth of your presence. He will feel your influence in his silence. Not because you are gone, but because you were never just a woman. You were a mirror. And in stepping back you have forced him to look not at you but at himself. But if he is immature, if he cannot bear the silence, he will distract himself. He will fill the void with superficial pleasures, quick validations and shallow pursuits. And in doing so, he reveals the very truth you needed to know. That he was never ready. Not for love, not for growth, not for you. So give him space. Not to make him chase, but to let him face his truth. What he feels in that space will tell you everything you need to know. Whether he reflects or runs, whether he grows or escapes, whether he returns as a man who has seen himself, or disappears as a boy who refuses to look. In the end, space is not a separation. It is a revelation, and only in that revelation can real connection be born again. If he is brave enough to walk through the silence and come out whole. When you step back and give a man space, something subtle yet profound begins to occur. Not in the world outside, but deep within his internal landscape. In the presence of another, especially someone who evokes emotion, the mind is often busy responding, adapting, performing. It is hard to know what one truly feels when constantly in reaction to another's presence. But the moment space is introduced, the external stimuli are silenced. It is then that the unconscious begins to emerge from beneath the surface. What he truly feels, not what he thinks he should feel, begins to rise from the hidden depths of his psyche. Without your voice, your expressions, your energy filling the air, he is left alone with himself, alone with the thoughts he didn't speak, the emotions he ignored, the attachments he downplayed. This space doesn't just reveal his desires, it confronts him with them. Was he drawn to your soul, or only to your company? Did he crave connection, or was he simply afraid of being alone? These questions, though rarely asked consciously, begin to tug at his awareness. And in this silence, stripped of performance, he discovers whether the feelings he held were genuine or conditional. You gave him no words, and yet you spoke volume. Your absence becomes a canvas upon which his inner world begins to paint truth. The fantasies fall away, the illusions dissolve. All that remains is what he truly wants. And if you are part of that truth, he begins to feel your presence, even in your distance. This is not something he always understands or verbalizes. It may show up in flashes, memories that replay at night, questions that suddenly pierce his day. He might feel confusion, even irritation, because the clarity he's used to controlling no longer belongs to him. He can't talk his way through this kind of knowing. It comes from within. Space then becomes more than distance. It becomes revelation. It strips him of the ability to pretend. It removes the need to impress. It brings forth the unfiltered, unpolished truth of how he really feels about you, about himself, and about what he truly desires when no one is watching and no one is listening. When you step back from a man, whether through silence, distance, or simply withholding your usual energy, something within him is forced to rise. It is not always immediate, and rarely is it comfortable, but it is always revealing. In your presence he had a role to play. Consciously or not, he responded to the image you held of him, to the rhythm you created together, to the emotional structure you upheld without asking for credit. But in your absence, that scaffolding falls. What emerges in its place is not the polished self he showed to the world, but the shadow, the neglected, hidden parts of his identity. These are the aspects he ignores, represses, or simply doesn't understand. And when you step back, you unknowingly shine a light directly onto them. This confrontation is not pleasant. It does not come wrapped in clarity or peace. It comes in restlessness, sudden irritability, emotional numbness, or even unexpected tears. The man who seemed composed now feels unbalanced. The one who seemed confident now feels uncertain. That is because he must face who he is without you there to balance his emotional ecosystem. The parts of him that needed you, depended on you, or were defined by you now stand exposed. The mirror you held up has shattered, and he is left looking into his own reflection with no one to filter the image. It is here that his real emotional maturity is tested. Not in how he acted when you were near, but in how he responds when you are gone. Some men try to run. They bury the discomfort, distract themselves, replace you too quickly. But others pause. Others notice that what's surfacing is not about you leaving, but about what was hiding when you were present. These are his shadows. Fears of abandonment, unhealed wounds from childhood, doubts about his worthiness, confusion about his path. You did not cause them, but your presence once soothed them. Now without you, they are unmatched. If he is courageous, he will begin to face them. Not to win you back, but to meet himself more honestly. And through this dark encounter he may begin to grow. Because the man who can sit with his shadow, who does not run from the discomfort of your absence, becomes the man capable of offering presence that is real, conscious, and deep. There are things we only understand once they are no longer in front of us. When a woman steps away from a man, not with bitterness, but with quiet intention, her absence begins to work in ways her presence never could. When she was there, she may have spoken softly, showed up consistently, gave him light affection, and yet, like many of life's treasures, her presence was absorbed into the background, mistaken as something permanent. But when she is gone, when her energy no longer weaves through his daily life, a strange shift takes place. Her absence becomes a mirror not of her but of him, of who he was with her, of who he failed to be, of who he wants to become. This mirror does not flatter, It does not lie, it reveals. In the silence she leaves behind, he begins to see the patterns that once went unnoticed. He hears the tone of her voice in memories, and now understands the meaning behind the words he once dismissed. He remembers moments where she was reaching out, not with desperation but with hope, and how he didn't reach back. The warmth he once felt at her side is now contrasted by a chill that lingers even in rooms full of people. He begins to feel not just the absence of her body, but the absence of her understanding, her insight, her intuition. What her presence could never teach him, her distance now reveals that she was not just someone in his life. She was someone who reflected something within him. His capacity for love, his avoidance of intimacy, his resistance to vulnerability. All of it becomes clearer now. The things she tolerated, the ways she nurtured, the times she stayed when she could have left. These things echo louder now than when she was near, because now he sees the outline of what once was through the shape it left behind. He may not say it, he may not even fully comprehend it, but deep down he begins to realize that her absence has stripped away all illusion. It forces him to look inward, not outward. No one can teach him this. No conversation can replace it. Only silence, only distance, only her stepping back could ever have revealed the truth about what she meant and what he is without her. When you give a man space, it may seem as if he forgets. He doesn't text. He doesn't call. His outer world looks untouched, unbothered. But the soul doesn't respond like the body does. What looks like absence on the surface often hides the presence of something much deeper. Memory, emotion, attachment, working quietly, internally. You see, a man doesn't forget a woman who touched his inner world. He simply starts to meet her in places he didn't expect, places even he cannot fully control. She begins to appear in his dreams, not always as herself, but as a symbol, a feeling, a presence, a sudden sense of peace in a chaotic scene, a familiar smile in a room of strangers, a voice whispering wisdom when he's on the edge of making another poor decision. The unconscious holds what the conscious mind tries to dismiss, and while he may push forward with his life, go through his routines, smile at others, there is a part of him that is still processing what she was and what she still is internally. Sometimes it shows up as thought, a random song on the radio that carries her name in its melody, a scent on the street that brings back an entire moment from months ago. He may brush it off, pretend it meant nothing, but inside he knows she is still there, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. And the more real she was to his spirit, the more his inner world insists on remembering. Then come the moments of reflection. These aren't planned. They happen late at night when the noise fades, or during a quiet drive when the world goes still. He begins to review what was said, what wasn't said, what should have been done differently, not because he's rehearsing regret, but because his soul is replaying what mattered. This internal meeting isn't about obsession. It's about recognition. His inner world is trying to show him something his outer self ignored. She mattered more than he realized. And even if he tries to run from it, distract himself, or numb it out, the heart has its own rhythm. It brings her back, again and again, until he no longer meets her by accident, but begins to understand why she keeps showing up at all. There is a moment in every man's journey when longing becomes something deeper, when it is no longer about missing a person, but about confronting what that person meant. When a woman gives him space, her silence becomes more than a void. It becomes a mess. In the beginning, he may feel a simple ache, a restlessness, an urge to reach out. But when that desire is not instantly satisfied, the emotion begins to evolve. It deepens. What was once impulse becomes introspection. Her absence begins to echo, not with noise, but with clarity. At first he may not understand it. He may mistake the feeling for frustration, or confuse it with pride. He might even distract himself, trying to replace what he cannot replicate. But over time, the silence she leaves behind starts to develop weight. It begins to whisper to him not with words but with sensations. He starts to feel her absence in the corners of his mind, in the background of his days. It's not just that she's gone, it's that something meaningful has been removed, and nothing else quite fits in its place. If her presence was deep, if she offered him understanding, patience, challenge, or peace, then that absence becomes sacred. It doesn't matter how composed he appears on the outside. Internally, something is moving. Her silence begins to press against him like a question. Why do I miss her? What was she really to me? Why does it still linger? And in seeking the answer, his longing begins to shift into meaning. He stops focusing on the fact that she's not there, and starts reflecting on why her presence mattered in the first place. This is where growth begins, because if he is emotionally honest, he realizes her silence holds more power than any argument ever could. She didn't need to explain. She didn't need to beg. She simply stepped back, and in doing so, she allowed him to confront his own feelings without distraction. The silence became the truth teller. It revealed the difference between wanting someone and valuing them. And if she truly meant something to him, then the silence doesn't just hurt. It teaches. It reveals. It awakens him to the reality that some people cannot be replaced. And some connections carry a meaning that grows louder when everything else goes quiet. When you give a man space, you're not just stepping away, you're handing him a mirror. Not a test of love in the way most people think, but a test of self. Because in the absence of your presence, your energy, your emotional availability, he is left face to face with his own emotional capacity. What he does in that space tells you everything, not about how much he misses you in words, but about how capable he is of confronting his own inner world. This is where many fail, not because they don't care, but because they haven't yet developed the strength to feel deeply without immediate reward or reassurance. Some will run. They'll dive into distractions. Another woman, more work, louder crowds, fleeting comforts. To the outside world, they look fine, maybe even better off. But this running is not strength, it's fear. The silence you gave them stirred emotions they don't want to face. Feelings that have been buried, wounds that were never healed. And in their rush to avoid those truths, they miss the very lesson the space was offering: growth. Others, however, will pause. They will feel the discomfort and sit with it, not because they enjoy it, but because something inside them knows that running won't bring peace. These are the men who rise to meet their feelings. They may not have all the right words or immediate clarity, but they begin the work. They reflect. They ask themselves hard questions. They revisit their actions and confront their fears. The space becomes sacred, not because they want to be alone, but because they finally realize the difference between needing someone and being ready for them. And this is what space does. It doesn't manipulate, it reveals. It strips away the performance. It removes the mask. It shows you who he is without the comfort of your presence, and whether he's willing to step toward maturity or shrink back into emotional avoidance. Because in the end, the man who truly desires connection will not fear the silence. He will use it. He will grow through it. He will meet himself inside it. And if he finds something real within, he will return not out of need, but out of choice, ready to love with depth, not just desire. So what does he truly feel when you give him space? He feels what he could never feel in your presence. The raw, unfiltered truth of his own heart. Your absence becomes a silent teacher, one that speaks to his unconscious, confronts his shadow, reflects his soul, awakens his longing, and ultimately tests his emotional maturity. You do not need to chase him. You do not need to explain yourself. Space will say everything for you. If he forgets you easily, let that reveal everything. But if your silence lingers in his soul, If your distance causes reflection instead of resentment, then know this: something meaningful has been planted deep within him, and it is growing quietly. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is nothing at all, not out of indifference, but out of wisdom, because real connection is never forced. It is discovered in absence, refined in silence, and proven in time. Give space not to punish, but to witness, and in that space, let him meet the parts of himself he's always avoided. If he rises, he is ready. If he runs, he never was. Let silence speak, let space reveal, and let truth unfold.